And we are live in 3, 2, and 1.
Good evening, bonsoir, and shalom to our viewers, and welcome to the Jewish Public Library. My name is Trudis Goldsmith-Reber, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the library's English Programming Committee. As co-chairs, we assist our Director of Programming, Roxana Browns, to make events like the one today happen. Thank you, Roxana, for bringing to the GPL Vikki Stark and Susan Schwartz. Today, we are happy to have them here and listen to their conversation a little bit later. First, while the threat of COVID-19 is still very much with us, the GPL has been producing, under Roxana's guidance and expertise, weekly Zoom events, and I shall just briefly mention how the next hour will unfold. Our technical director is Eddie Stone. He will get us onto the screen, or he's already done it. He has been successful. Thank you, Eddie. And I shall introduce our two guests, Vikki Stark and Susan Schwartz, and we shall listen for 30 minutes to their conversation. Just for our viewers, I would like to mention the question and answer period will be 15 minutes after the conversation and the interview. And please do post your questions on the Facebook account, and Eddie will read them out aloud for Vikki and Susan after the interview and wait for their response. But let me introduce our guests first. I will make it short so that we get most of the time listening to them. Thank you, Vikki and Susan, for joining us. And we are looking very much forward to the topic and to that conversation between two of you. Just a short summary for Vikki and for Susan. Vikki Stark is an internationally known psychotherapist, family therapist, speaker, author, and divorce recovery expert, and the director of the Sedona Counseling Center of Montreal. She's particularly known for her groundbreaking work on wife abandonment syndrome, as well as her work on gender and couples. The Sedona Counseling Center of Montreal is a multidisciplinary team of psychologists, psychotherapists, family therapists, life coaches, as well as nutritionists, osteopath, career counselor, and sex therapist, offering services both online and in office. Vikki is a familiar face on television and radio, and she has been a guest on NBC's The Today Show, CBC, CTV, Global, Oprah Radio, and written about in USA Today, the New York Daily News, and Maclean's Magazine, among many others. She has had more than 3 million views on her blog on Psychology Today magazine called Schlepping Through Heartbreak, which deals with all aspects of relationships. In 2010, Vikki published Runaway Husbands, The Abundant Wife's Guide to Recovery and Renewal, which is based on a study of over 400 women worldwide. As a result of the book and the subsequent website, I quote, www.runawayhusbands.com, she has mentored a worldwide community of women and regularly conducts online therapy groups as well as divorce recovery retreats in Montreal, in Canada, and Sedona, Arizona. Her other books include, I quote, My Sister, Myself, The Surprising Ways That Being an Older, Middle, younger, or Twin Shaped Your Life. The Divorce Talk is another one, How to Tell the Kids, A Parent's Guide to Breaking the News Without Breaking Their Hearts. And a third one, Planet Heartbreak, Abundant Wives Tell Their Stories. There she is an editor. And of course, we all know Susan Schwartz. She is a well-known Montrealer and a longtime reporter and feature writer with the Montreal Gazette. She shall interview Vikki Stark on the topic, and here we are with the topic: in a time of coronavirus, is it possible to find some good? And now the conversation will start. Welcome, and we are looking forward.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
It's lovely to be here. Vikki, you and I spoke in April when thoughts of COVID-19 seemed to be crowding out most other thoughts, and it was a huge challenge to be upbeat. You told me we have to use all our internal resources, but also to use this as an opportunity to connect to people and to grow. How do you think people have been dealing with the crisis so far?
You know, it's funny how in the past few months, time has sort of telescoped. It feels like April was maybe 5 years ago. I mean, it feels like such a long time ago. And when tonight in preparation for this, I read the blog that I had posted that I had sent to you, Susan. And I was marveling about the fact that, you know, people were getting their groceries delivered, or things that just seemed so remarkable back then that now we're like, ho hum, oh yeah, we did, been there, done that. But, you know, so there's been this tremendous evolution from the initial trauma in March, at the end of February and in March, when we started to twig to the fact that this is big and something is going on, to this point where we're getting into a phase which sort of represents a saying that I've used throughout my life, which is what's extraordinary becomes ordinary. So now we're used to getting our groceries delivered. And so throughout this whole period of transition, I mean, definitely what we've seen has been the initial, actually, I think it's sort of a global trauma, because people everywhere have developed fear, and fear of contamination, fear of the unknown, fear of terrible illness and death, and fear of other people. So those people who don't already suffer from anxiety probably do now, because that's sort of the normal state of affairs. You know, the fact is that we have this tremendous uncertainty that, and even the people that we've depended on, you know, the doctors and the people in the news who were supposed to guide us are making it up as they go along, as each new piece of information comes in. So I think emotionally and psychologically, the whole society is experiencing this state of transition, this state of fear, and in some ways chaos, where you don't know, can I do this or can I not do this? Can I go to the pharmacy, or is it not safe to go to the pharmacy? You know, should I stay home? You know, and the simple things that we would do without thinking, we now have to evaluate every move. So there, you know, I've said, you know, several times over the course of the past few months that we don't even begin to know the level of stress that we're under, and how it's affecting us, and how it's challenging us to face whatever each person's individual issue is. It's now front and center, and we have to grapple with ourselves, with our emotions, with our disappointment, with our fear, with our anxiety. And, you know, really the topic of today's talk, in the time of coronavirus, is there some good? Really, I think that I'm going to expand it to be, in the face of any trauma or any crisis, how do we make a little shift in our thinking so that we can use any crisis as a springboard for change?
Okay. Talk to me a bit about the typical, so then we'll broaden the discussion of COVID and the coronavirus to any serious crisis. Talk to me about, in your experience, the typical ways in which most people deal with a serious crisis.
You know, we live our lives aiming for peace, happiness, and maybe perfection. And so I think most people are unprepared for crisis because we don't expect it. You know, particularly if you're blessed enough to live a life where you're not facing trauma, you're not facing, you know, struggles with health or finances, or food security, or the things that so many people in the world are facing. If you're blessed to live, you know, a safer kind of existence, in some ways we might be unprepared to deal with a crisis of this magnitude. And so we don't have the skills. So that people, I think that by and large, people are scrambling to be able to figure out how do I deal with this, and how do I deal with myself and my emotions and my disappointment and my frustration. You know, the world is even more frustrating now. You know, when we do get to the grocery store, we then have to stand on line for 15 minutes just to get in the front door. You know, the things that we took for granted are more frustrating. So people are dealing with this frustration. And I think that at this point, you know, a friend of mine said, I'm sick of coronavirus. She said, I'm not sick with coronavirus, but I'm sick of coronavirus. And I think that at this point, like 3-4 months out, that a lot of people are starting to feel like, okay, enough with coronavirus. This is enough. This crisis has gone on long enough. And they're yearning to get out and feel that sense of normalcy, even if they know that it might be a bit risky. So I think that the frustration level is rising, and people are sort of now minimizing the risks in their own mind because maybe they don't know people who have been ill or acutely ill with the virus. And so it's starting to feel a bit remote. But I think that, that by and large, it's that sense of frustration that we're being held back from doing the things, the normal things that we want to be able to do on a daily basis.
So what can we be doing as a response?
Yeah.
Is it about sort of pivoting our response to the crisis?
Yeah, and I love that word pivot. That's the thing, we have to pivot. And I think pivoting, Susan, that's a great word, and that's the way we should go. Because I think what we need to do is look below what's happening to the hidden gift of this extraordinary period of time. I mean, we all know the ways in which people have tried to connect with each other. So many people are feeling lonely and isolated. But the hidden gift is, you know, it's a blessing and a curse. The curse is that we have to deal with our own issues. We have to face our own issues. If it's loneliness, we have to face the loneliness. If it's frustration, we have to face the frustration. If we're fighting with our spouse and there already was tension there and now it's worse, we have to face that. So that's the curse. But the blessing is that we have to face our own frustration, and we have to deal with the issues in our marriage, for example, and we have to deal with our own frustration. When life is calm and things are just going along normally, it's typically not a period of change. Most people change, and transitions in the really profound changes that take place in people's lives tend to take place as a result of a crisis. So, I mean, you may have heard, and I've certainly heard people who have had cancer who said, I never would have wanted cancer, but it taught me so much. I was forced, kicking and screaming, to change my diet, to slow down, to take care of myself. You know, it forces you, crises force us to deal with things, and they force us to reach down inside and pull up some characteristics that we're going to have to use to face this period of time.
You are a great admirer of a book by an author named Ryan Holiday called The Obstacle is the Way. I've heard you speak about it. Why don't you tell our listeners a little about it?
Yeah, exactly. And so that's the premise behind this little book by Ryan Holloway. He's studied the Stoics and Marcus Aurelius, and he wrote this book. And I'm just going to read this. One of the things that he wrote in the book is, we don't control what happens to us, but we do control how we respond to what happens to us. So, according to his philosophy, nothing is inherently good or bad in most things that happen to us, but it's the question of how we can mine that event to help us grow. So, for example, in this period of time, we might be just wishing it were over, but instead, if we slow down and we say, what can we do differently? And how can we use this extraordinary life that we're living at the moment to access integrity, patience, resourcefulness, all of these different qualities, that will be necessary to get us through this in the long run. So his theory is that anything can be useful. Anything that happens to us can be useful. And that we can, if we do that little shift, and I suppose that's the little shift in thinking, because typically when something bad happens, we feel like, no, I don't want this, make it go away. I want it to be over. I can't take this. I can't take it anymore. And that uses a lot of emotional energy. That feeling that we're trying to escape from something, and that we're hoping with all of our hearts, hope, that this is going to be over with soon. And that how much longer is this going to go on? And when are the numbers going to start going down? And all of that emotional energy that we're using to sort of deny what's happening and to wish it away is very exhausting. I mean, I think I'm exhausted. I think everybody's exhausted. We're all exhausted. And it's partly being exhausted because of all of the thinking that we have to do. But I think it's also that mindset that this is bad and we want this to be over. And when is this going to be over? And when is the vaccine going to come out? And how many more months? And, when can I travel again? And when can I go visit my mother in Toledo, Ohio, or whatever it is? And, that sense of yearning for something and waiting and wishing for something takes a lot of emotional energy. So I think that the flip side of that is something that is called radical acceptance. And when you start thinking about radical acceptance, you can start to relax. If you can say, rather than, when is this going to be over? If you can say, sometimes I say I'm a therapist, right? So I say to my clients, just cut off the when at the beginning of the sentence. People say, why did he do this? I'll say, just cut off the why, and he did this. When is this going to be over? Cut off the when. It's going to be over. So that instead of yearning, if we can accept what we have with patience and grace, and recognize that 5 years from now, we're going to look back and say, did you believe 2020? That was a ride. That was a roller coaster. Oh my God, where were you? What happened to you? And we're all going to have this badge of honor that we lived through it and we survived it. So it's this idea, and maybe it's sort of like a Zen idea of what makes people unhappy, what causes the most pain in people's lives are expectations. You're waiting and hoping, oh, it didn't happen. Oh, you're hoping for something else. Oh, that didn't happen either. oh my goodness, well, that happened, but I hope it stays. You know, it's this constant cycling through expectations that keeps people so very unhappy. And if we can really, you know, it's a very simple idea, but it's really very profound and complex, which is just to live in the present moment, then hard to do. And then your anxiety can go down and you can say, bring it on, you know, whatever life wants to give me, I'm happy to accept it.
It's also about using the obstacles in order to strengthen our own internal mechanisms to help us function in a stronger way. You've talked also about Alice Sommer and what you've learned from her.
Yeah. Well, Alice Sommer, she died maybe 4 or 5 years ago. She was at 110 when she was alive. She was the oldest living Holocaust survivor. And I give, you know, as Trudis so kindly read my CV, I give retreats every year in Sedona, Arizona. And at the end of the retreat, I always show the movie about Alice Sommer called The Lady in Number 6. So if people haven't watched it, if you can get it somewhere, you have to watch it. It's a little 36-minute documentary. And in this story, you hear about her life and how she grew up in Vienna, and she was a concert pianist, and she was having a wonderful life and a wonderful career, married to a violinist, I think he was, yeah, they had a child. And then they're in Vienna, you know, in the 30s, and the Holocaust hit. And she was taken to Treblinka concentration camp, where a lot of musicians and artists were sent as sort of a demonstration of how well the inmates were treated. And the story about Alice Sommer is, you know, I feel like if you watch that 36-minute video, you're going to learn everything there is to learn about life. Because people said about her that she would play the piano and lift everybody's spirits. And throughout her life, even though she had lost her husband and her whole family in the concentration camp, she survived with her son. And throughout her life, she was always laughing, always happy. And one of the quotes from the movie, which I have taped to my computer, is, "Even the bad is beautiful if you know where to look for it." So that was her philosophy. And she lived it out, because in the movie, she talks about when her son was 67 years old, and she must have been 90 something or whatever. And he wasn't feeling well one day on a Tuesday. And he had a career as a cellist. He was an internationally known cellist, and he was also living a wonderful life. So he wasn't feeling well on a Tuesday. He went to the hospital on the Tuesday, and by Wednesday, something was terribly wrong and he died. So here this woman had survived the Holocaust. She had this one son, this precious son of hers. And when she tells the story about his death, what does she say? She says, "I thank God every day that he didn't suffer." She said, if he had to die, I'm so happy that he didn't spend a year in suffering. He went on a Tuesday and he died on a Wednesday. He had only one day in the hospital. And she managed to find something out of this terrible tragedy that she could hang on to and feel that there was a value in that. And when she talks about the passing of her son, that's the story that she tells. So that's this kind of woman who has this indefeatable spirit, you know, that she was going to find something of value out of a tragedy that, of course, you know, must have hurt her so profoundly.
Oh, of course. I seem to remember you and I discussed the film, and I think I found it, if I'm not mistaken, simply by Googling her name and the title of the film, which you said, say it again, it was something like The Woman in Number 6?
Number 6. The Lady in Number 6.
The Lady in Number 6. I think it's easy enough to find.
Yeah.
She sounds amazing, and you sound amazing recounting these incredible people.
about the film is that one of the other women who was in the concentration camp with her came to visit her every Sunday or something like that. And they interviewed this woman. And this woman said, you know, that at the end of the war, she was left for dead. People thought she was in this room with everyone who had died, and they thought she was dead. And she didn't die, she survived. And she said, when you've experienced such terrible things, you learn that there are very few things in life that have meaning, that have value. And those things are life itself and relationships. And she said, everything else you can do without. So what I learned from her was to be able to value life itself. We take our lives for granted, but just, you know, the tremendous value of getting up in the morning, even if you feel crummy, and saying, okay, good, I got up today, I'm still alive. And then whatever relationships we have, you know, how precious they are, and how so often we're striving for something else when it doesn't take all that much to be able to love life.
That this is indeed as good as it gets. I just want to ask you one final question, and then we'll see if people have questions for you. We mentioned the word pivot earlier. Leave us with just some advice about how we can change our focus so that we remember what you're talking about, so that we remember that perspective, so that we don't lose sight of it, so that we understand what there is really to be appreciative of and grateful for.
You know, when I'm in my office, I'm not in my office at this moment, or these days because of the virus, but when I'm in my office, I have in my desk drawer a bunch of blue rubber bands. Like this, a rubber band, but blue. And so I might, if somebody said to me, how will I remember? I'd give them a blue rubber band and I'd say, put it around your wrist. And every time you hear yourself complaining, oh, this is so bad, my life is so bad, how come I don't have this, how come I don't have that? Snap your rubber band. And remember that that's not the person you want to be. And you're never going to be happy that way. That the way to be happy is to snap your rubber band. When you hear it, you have to monitor your own thinking, monitor your own self-talk, and become aware of when you are saying things that go against joy, that go against loving life, that go against appreciating how valuable our lives are and how lucky we are in spite of all the hard things that so many of us are facing. Because life is not easy, but it still can be beautiful.
That's beautiful. I think that's a beautiful note for us to wind up on.
Okay.
Is that, Trudy, are you having, I mean, I could go on talking to Vikki forever, but do we have questions from our listeners for
Well,
Vikki?
Eddie, I think if he is already prepared, he will monitor what has arrived on the account page. I have thousands of questions, but I would like to hand it over rather to those outside, to our viewers, because we are very, very grateful that they are following us. Sometimes there are hundreds, even thousands who have been followed a session like that. And I think because it is such a crucial question and it occupies literally everyone, our children, our grandchildren, us, older or young or middle-aged, it doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter. So if Eddie is ready with questions, I would invite him to read some of them. Otherwise, I will ask.
Well, at the moment, Trudis, thank you. First of all, don't have any questions coming in on Facebook at the moment. We'd like to, again, invite our viewers to submit them now. We have a couple of comments. One particular from Rebecca was basically thanking you both for the reminder to appreciate what we have in the present. I do have a question, which might be a little more specific, what might you recommend to newly or even not so newly separated and divorced parents at this time regarding their kids' concerns, or even directly to the kids themselves in an age-appropriate manner, of course?
Yeah. This is a huge topic. And as Truda said, I work with divorce a lot. And I work with divorced parents a lot. And it's a huge topic because everyone has different comfort zone. In my household, I might be comfortable doing this, and in someone else's house, I'm comfortable doing that. But when your kids are going back and forth between two households, and the rules are different, in one household, it's fine for the kids to go play with the neighbors and play down the street and hang out, in the back alley. And in another household, no, they're not allowed out. And the same child who's out playing in the back alley comes back to the other parent's household where there might be an elderly grandparent. And so the stakes are tremendously high. And this contributes to a huge amount of conflict for those separated or newly separated parents. It's already a difficult thing to maneuver through. Co-parenting. Everyone who co-parents deserves a medal. You get a medal. I'm sending you all a medal because it's so hard. But I think the thing that we have to do is try to be kind and try not to use this as an excuse to increase tension, to increase stress, to try to rein back that wish to make it into a black and white issue, a good versus bad issue. And I suppose in the obstacle is the way idea, to use this as an opportunity to try to communicate with the other parent in a civil, if not respectful, maybe respectful is too much, but in a civil way, to really fight your impulse to sort of scream and say, what are you doing? They shouldn't be playing in the alley. But rather to understand that people have different risk tolerance levels. And you can't force somebody else to have your same risk tolerance level. And so this is an opportunity, like everything in life is an opportunity to work on yourself, to try to think through, how do I have a discussion? How do I communicate in a more civil or respectful way with my children's other parent? And just as a final statement in this, and I won't talk about this too long, but the thing that we know is that it's not the mere fact of divorce that causes problems for children. It's the level of conflict between the parents that causes the most problems for children. So there we go.
We do have a couple of other comments coming in, but more or less, Vikki, if you just like to sort of repeat perhaps your contact coordinates. Some people are just interested in certain issues regarding either the separation and divorce practice, if you don't mind.
My email is info@Vikki Stark, VIKKISTARK.com, or my website is vikkistark.com. That's the easiest.
Perfect.
No C's, VIKKISTARK.
But perhaps I might add, perhaps Vikki could also tell our viewers where they could find her books.
Oh yeah.
Because I mean, I had to do it in a rather fast way, but it's important because they all deal with those issues.
Yes.
Perhaps you could just mention that.
So if you go to my website, vikkistark.com, all the books are listed there, so then people can find, they're all on Amazon.
Okay, very good. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for letting me talk about that stuff.
Just have another question that came in, which they're trying their best not to get too much into politics, but nevertheless, during this pandemic, there is a lot of very overt and sometimes very polarized interest in basically people talking about public health measures, governmental involvement, and I suppose that would have to do with both physical and mental health. Have you found anything like that coming up in your practice too? And how would you advise your clients to deal with it, or how would you advise them to deal with it?
Well, I think it's a question, if I can rephrase the question, it seems as though the question is this preoccupation that we have with public health measures, and certainly mental health issues are at the forefront. And I think that a lot of people are hesitant to approach a therapist because they're not comfortable with the Zoom or the remote format. And they're more comfortable with the face-to-face sitting in somebody's office talking to them. And that's too bad, because once you start working with somebody in therapy on Zoom, it takes about 4 minutes, and then you're comfortable and it feels normal. But I think that, definitely people talk about the strain on their mental health and their emotional health, but more in how their usual problems feel more intense. So it's not so much that they're talking exactly about what they're hearing in public health or how to deal with their mental health, but rather if they, for example, like I said before, if they've been fighting with their spouse, now they're fighting more with their spouse. If they're feeling isolated, they're feeling more isolated. If they're feeling anxiety or OCD symptoms, these things are all exacerbated. So, so that people need to not be shy to reach out in their communities to try to, and I say in their communities because eventually you might go back to seeing someone face to face, or not in your communities. Frankly, you could have a therapist anywhere in the world. So, yeah.
Fair enough. Okay. We'll just ask again if anybody has any other questions or comments they'd like to make online. In the meantime, Trudis, if we can just pass it back to you.
Okay. You mentioned before to use the crisis, this particular crisis, which is, someone asked me recently, well, can't you remember? I mean, what happens in a pandemic? And I said, I'm not over 100 years old. I've never lived through another pandemic. I'd not been affected before. But you mentioned that one could use the crisis as a springboard for change.
Yes.
And there comes immediately my question now. Most people are unprepared. If they have had, as you mentioned, a comfortable life, they're rather secure in their lifestyle. If there is this unexpected crisis and you are not prepared for this springboard for change, how do you approach it? I assume, but you might have better advice. If you have friends, if you have relations within your family unit, you may find help there. But if you have no one, if you are actually alone, if you are not old, and cannot really accept that crisis as a springboard for change, how do you get yourself into this positive thought to accept life in spite of it? How do you, what do you do?
Yeah, it's a great question. It really is a great question because, what I'm talking about is not easy.
No, it's not easy, but just on a personal note, in order to make you understand, and you will understand. Before the crisis happened, just a few months before, I lost my husband unexpectedly. Few months after that, I decided to move out of a house where I'd lived over 43 years. I had to get accustomed to an apartment in an apartment building, which I still call my hotel. Mm-hmm. Then comes COVID. The kids are far away in the United States, and in other places you can't see them. So there is a crisis, a real crisis, and a springboard for change because I'm willing to change. But how do you prepare yourself for that? How do you get out of that? How do you get any means? I think of all the other people who might be in that same boat.
Yes. Yeah. Actually, the community that I work with is a community of women who believe themselves to be in happy, secure, long-term marriages, some of them 40 years, really marriages until the day their husband taps them on the shoulder and says, I'm out of here, and runs away and leaves. And their whole lives disintegrate. Sort of, the loss of your husband is, sometimes a death you can understand. Somebody walking away from you like that after 35 years is also extremely traumatic. And then they have to sell their house because now they're in a divorce. So this is I work with women in the same situation all the time. And the thing that is so important in any situation is to be able to have the long view and to know that you're not always going to feel this badly. And that over time, you will discover ways that you can create a new normal and rebuild your life. And it's not going to look like your old life, but that doesn't mean that it's not going to be lovely and satisfying. It's not, but you may be surprised at the things that you can bring into your life to enrich your life. Once the initial period of the acute suffering and grief and loss is healed. With the women, the thousands of women that I've worked with, many, many, many times, I've seen women who have been in terrible grief, who've lost 30 pounds, who are suffering terribly. And then I see them again 3 years later or 2 years later, and they've gone back to school, or they've taken up painting, or they've, started some kind of pursuit. And then they feel like, oh yeah, I didn't know I could do this, but I could. And I think it's just the mindset to believe that life is rich and it doesn't end until it's over. So just keep going, and with an aspect of curiosity, like what's coming next, even though, of course you have to heal from all of this loss. There's no doubt about that, but that over time, there will be another chapter.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Again, the title of the conversation today is, in a time of coronavirus, is it possible to find some good? If you had to give one answer to that, which one would it be? Possible to find some good?
I'd say, of course it's good. Of course it's good. I mean, look at all the wonderful things, and that we all know about. There is good, there is suffering, but there's also good. And we've connected, in the beginning when we contacted the old friends that we hadn't spoken to for 20 years, and everyone is reaching out to each other, and everyone's sending each other these dumb videos to make them laugh. There was that contagion of happy videos with talking dogs and things. Yeah, there's good.
Something also, before Eddie comes on again, very quickly, which hit me, which touched me, when you said, we do control how we react to what is happening to us. We may not control what is happening, but we can control how we absorb it, how we react to it, how we move away from it or onto it or onto something else. I think that was very important, because, and connected with it, you said life itself is the great gift, and we take our life for granted. So we do have a chance to move away from the coronavirus situation, which will hold us as a prisoner to a certain extent.
Thank you so much for bringing that back at this, as we're wrapping up. Those 2 points that you're raising, I think, really sort of sum up the message that I wanted to get across tonight. It's not so much what life throws at you, but it's what you do with it.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to interject. I don't see that we have any questions. We can ask. We have a few minutes if anybody wants to ask. But I must say that there are a lot of people who are basically commenting and getting together, even in the comments section, about this and other things. So this kind of brought us together as well. So that's much appreciated as well. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. That's beautiful.
Just another observation. One of my sons lives in Toronto, is married, has no children, the other one in the United States. I spoke to him because they work from home. He works from home, his wife works from home. They have not been in those gigantic office towers in Toronto. They said they are all empty. There's hardly anybody in there, but we work from home. We are together. Our whole life centers around being together and doing our work. We don't have the usual routine of moving out in the morning, meeting our friends at the workplace, exchanging, having lunch with them, coming home, and then be together with our mate. And he was saying there are quite a number of my friends, couples, who cannot take it anymore. And after coronavirus, they have already now decided they have to move away from each other. They cannot take it. He said, Mom, there will be a big change in people. He's 46, people of our age who have been together and working together, some with children, some without, who will just terminate that relationship. They can't take it anymore. And I was wondering if you have experienced this also in your, perhaps already in your practice.
Yeah, no, definitely. You know, I suppose it's what I said in the beginning, that we don't even begin to know the level of strain that we're under. And you can imagine, you know, how, you know, when people have been together for, let's say, 40 years, they're in their 60s and 70s, and somebody retires, and now they're home together all the time. And I'm sure some people in the audience recognize this, that, you know, they used to go to work and now the guy's home all the time. And they're there all the time. And it's, wow, it's a huge adjustment. And that was something that you saw coming. You knew that at some point that they were both going to retire and be home all the time. And they weren't even locked in the house together. And so that now having couples have to be together and be each other's only, you know, primary social network for months at a time puts a abnormal strain on a relationship. You know, I wonder whether, you know, it might not be a bad idea for couples to sort of say, okay, that room is my room and I'm going to hang out in there at night and be separate from you, or between 9 and 12, don't talk to me, I don't exist. You know, to be able to at least get some distance from each other, because it is hard. It is definitely hard.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why, you know, that's why I hope that people will try to find a marriage counselor when they're going through this, because it's too bad if marriages fall apart due to this external strain that is not their fault, it's not their doing, but it just happens.
You also mentioned the book. I forgot the author, the name of the author. The obstacle is I can't.
Way by Ryan Holiday, like going on a holiday.
Okay, Ryan Holiday. Okay, that might be good to repeat that for the people who may want to read the book.
Yeah, and he has a wonderful, is it a TED Talk? Yeah, he has a wonderful TED Talk on the internet. I think maybe it's not a TED Talk, but on YouTube, if you look up Ryan Holiday,
okay,
he has this wonderful little video that explains his philosophy of the obstacle is the way.
Yeah, you also mentioned before, unless Eddie interrupt me if you have some outside questions, but
no, at the moment, no, lots of comments, not questions at the moment.
No, as you were mentioning before too, both of you suggesting it will force us, the loneliness at times, especially when you are alone and there's no family around and the borders are closed to a certain extent. or for fear you don't go out because you're of a certain age, you do not want to become infected. So all the normal routine things like going out for supper, meeting friends, all kind of things. Now I'm at the lake where there is hardly anybody here anymore because some of the cottages are closed or some are owned by people who live in the United States and they cannot come. So what do you do with yourself when you suddenly are alone and you have had a routine which has shaped you? I did the weirdest things, which people say, you are doing things like that? Like I suddenly started, I wanted to knit. I used to knit when the kids were 2 years old, 4 years old, or at that age, and I never touched the needle again. I didn't even know how to buy yarn or where to get the yarn anymore. But suddenly I have this obsession, I want to knit again. Or join another book club, which I always love to read. And of course, my whole heart is with the Jewish Public Library, and I have a mission there. And coming from Germany with a very tragic history, German Jewish history, I have made it my mission to stay with this library and do whatever I can and learn from them, whatever I can learn. But you suddenly do things which you have never done before or you never wanted to do. I even want to learn to paint watercolor. A stupidest thing because nature is so beautiful around here that I said, but you suggested that too. It will bring you out into fields you have never thought about, things you have never done, because you're so lonely that suddenly there is a creative force somehow which makes itself known unexpectedly. I don't know if you want, like, you spoke about this unbelievable lady, Alice Hertzsommer, and she's she's just one of the millions and millions and millions who unfortunately disappeared, and she made it, but she's just one of those with this strong force and love for life. This is unusual. Not everybody is like that, but perhaps you can say something about that again.
But you know what I love about what you're saying, and I've seen this in so many places, is that the isolation, having these long evenings to yourself, when you can't go out or do anything, it does stimulate creativity. So, for example, in the blog that I wrote for my Psychology Today thing about the coronavirus, I ended it by saying, why don't you get a journal and write down your feelings, and also paste things in the journal to put color and draw a rainbow or something back then when they first started painting rainbows, and to do something. So I got myself this little journal, and for a little while I was writing in the journal, very heartfelt stuff. But I think it's an opening to try some different things. I mean, I'm remembering a time in my life when I was alone, when I was single and suffering for various reasons, and I joined a women's barbershop chorus. Mm-hmm. I have to tell you, I have the worst voice of anybody in the world, and the fact that they let me into the women's barbershop chorus was only an act of kindness. But the benefit of being in the chorus was that I had to learn all of my part. So I had these long evenings to myself, listening to this thing and singing and all that stuff. And so that ate up a lot of time, and it was a very, very creative thing. And then once a week, I would go to my chorus meeting, and these wonderful, wonderful women embraced me and helped me through that hard time in my life. But in a million years, I would never have thought that I would be in a women's barbershop chorus. But, what is it they say? Something is the mother of invention. Forgot what it is.
Necessity.
Necessity is So I had to do something with my evenings. So necessity is so I started singing. So there we go. So it is a fertile time for creativity in all sorts of ways. And if people can sort of break out of their typical way of doing things and maybe have more time to to pursue creative things, this is a great time to do it.
Yeah. And it's really great that you are able to tell our viewers about that possibility to be courageous and perhaps to do things like that. I don't know, Eddie, if we have more time or if I have to say goodbye and thank you, or perhaps you want to summarize some of those responses which you got?
Well, mostly pardon me, mostly people have been very complimentary of your work, Vikki. And again, they're really enthused about being able to share online and, benefit from what you were saying. And certainly Trudis as well from what you've been mentioning. I was just curious, Susan, did you have any other comments or questions to add before we go? Because we're got a couple of more minutes before we have to go.
My job is mostly listening. Over the years, I've interviewed Vikki a number of times, and she's always been an incredible source of knowledge and information and compassion and empathy. I've read most of her books. I think maybe there's one that I haven't read. So I can recommend them highly from the point of view of a reader. They're clear, and the same, just as Vikki comes across on the screen as someone really open and compassionate, there's that persona in her books as well. My job mostly is asking people questions and listening to their answers. And on a good day, I get to learn something. And I feel that I have always come away from an interview with Vikki Stark having learned a good deal. So thank you, Vikki.
That's so kind.
I guess, Trudis, you just want to wrap things up?
Yes, I can do that again and thank our guests, Vikki and Susan, of course, for a fascinating evening. I think it is heartwarming to hear you speak about these things, and I'm sure our